Hi, and welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice. My guest today is David Woods. He's a playwright, he's an artist, he's a poet, and he's here with me today. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Leslie.
Something that's most recent for you is a play called Choices in the Skin. Where does that title come from?
Choices in the Skin. Well, titles for me, you know, are called forward by the work, so I usually don't have a preset anything. I create a play, create a character, and then at the end I ask the play, what do you want to be called? And, and usually it answers. But this play was about, it was commissioned by the Black Educators Association of Nova Scotia for a youth conference where they wanted to examine the effects in terms of the perspectives youth have on their futures, in terms of the kind of things, conscious or unconscious, that affects them when they're making career choices.
Yeah, now you've been working with kids for a number of years. I mean, 20 years or more, in music, art, well, drama in particular.
Every aspect of performance, expression, in terms of getting people to understand history and their own culture. So the title emerged out of that, you know, after I wrote a story about a young man named Dwayne Jones. And I think Choices in the Skin, for me, I like the title at the end. Sometimes I don't like my titles, but because it showed, you know, in a sense, how race and being in the skin affects so much of a person's behavior, which this play was an examination of.
Yes, now you also directed it.
Yes, I didn't want to, but I flew in this beautiful young woman from Toronto to direct, and then we couldn't find a lead actress, and since she fell in love with the lead guy.
Oh, life is complicated, huh?
Yeah, so and we had a wonderful basketball player from the St. Mary's basketball team, actually, former CIU champions, who ended up doing the lead. So it was quite an interesting experience for me. Yeah.
Now tell me about when you sit down and you write a play, it's words on paper, especially if you're this involved, if you're directing it.
Yeah.
By the time it's on stage, my guess is it's a different creature. Does it change?
I think initially when I was writing plays, in my younger days, the move from the paper to the stage, because you quite quickly found out that certain words didn't wrap around some people's tongues the way you kind of imagined. But I think now, because I've spent so much time and matured in my own vision of things, I write words now that I think actually fit a lot cleaner. So in a sense, the play itself is more affected by the production values more so than the transformation of the play. And you also try to get actors who can actually deliver your own vision. And I think that's just part of the maturing process. I think early in the game, you know, things were very subject to change. But now they're pretty well consistent, and the big question is whether you have the money to do the sets and the and the lighting, the kind of production values that illuminate the play in the way
to bring your vision forward for people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, play is action and dialogue.
Right.
Where do the voices of your characters come from?
Well, my voices, I live with my voices. My genesis as a writer, to a large extent, came from the spoken word. When I was about 15 years old, I went up to North Preston to work at a camp, and met this wonderful family, the Frasers, with who had about 15 children, who then had their own children, and on and on and on. And every weekend, everybody'd come home, and I used to call it the North Preston daycare because there were so many people in the house. But there's a very strong oral culture. And on any given weekend, any day on that weekend, half the community would drop in to say hi, to confess, to look for free food, whatever. And I had this whole panoply of voices and people and characters, and I just totally fell in love with the idea of how this community still spoke to each other, that the TV was an irrelevant issue versus what was going on in the kitchen. And I think my ear for language really developed from that, and so language emerges. I hear people all the time. I listen to people all the time, and I listen for the cues, you know, the clues that language gives me. So in a sense, a lot of my insight into character actually comes from words rather than, you know, the characters, you know, inner secrets and psyche, but actually how the words reveal little secrets.
The language. Do you speak out loud while you're writing? If I was standing there over
No.
your shoulder in the room? No?
No.
You
No,
can
because
keep quiet and
yeah,
just get the words out?
I don't make a drop of noise when I'm writing, but I listen I'm a voracious listener, so you know, I pick, you know, but when I go home, it's the reverse, you know, where I shut my mind to other influences and let the words in kind of, you know, percolate in my consciousness.
Now, you're a poet as well. Your book was titled Native Song.
Right, my first book, yeah.
Yeah, does the poet's language find its way into the play, or do you have to keep a pretty stiff divider line between the two?
It depends on the type of play you're writing, you know. I've written poetic type plays, in other words, where the actual use of poetry or poetic approaches to language were integrated, like I wrote a play called Nova Scotia Reality Song and one called Nova Scotia Suite. So it integrated a whole poetic language, you know. And then in other plays, it simply imposes too much of a kind of, you know, pattern to the way people speak. So, but again, you know, I decide that very clearly, and you know, as I said, now being a more mature writer, I can actually deliberately know when, you know.
Well, I like
yeah,
the
to
way you
divide
say you're a
those things.
mature writer. I just say I'm getting old.
Yeah,
You know.
same thing. Look at my receding hairline. Yeah.
Tell me about yourself a little bit more. You were born in Trinidad.
Born in Trinidad.
But came to Nova Scotia fairly young.
Yeah, came to Nova Scotia when I was 10 years old. Trinidad, well, I didn't know a whole lot. My family was in a bit of a turmoil because my parents had went away to England when I was about 2 years old. Lived with several members of the family, extremely poor. Didn't know it, but you know, grew up with about 30 people in the house, you know, and with granddad, and all I remember is him having all these chickens when we first arrived, and every week the population would disappear, because I think he kind of volunteered to look after these families that had all gone away to the United States or England, but I don't think he realized what feeding us meant, you know. And you know, my consciousness was not there. You know, I had an uncle who used to give me a lot of books, and I think that first started the writing instinct. But I didn't really have any consciousness of either Trinidad or myself, because, you know, growing up without parents, you just don't develop the same kind of thing. So really the beginning of my consciousness as a person, as a writer and all that, really started here, and it really exploded when I got to the Prestons.
Yeah, and now you led us a little bit into that world of North Preston here in Nova Scotia. Tell me a bit more about that culture, that background, that place. It was very interesting to hear you say that, you know, the language was not television. Things of the outside world stayed pretty far in the outside world. Tight-knit community? Yeah,
very tight-knit, very warm, very loving. As a complete outsider, I was just shocked at how I was embraced, you know. But now, when I say shocked, not in a negative way, but you know, the fact that I had no roots, no connection, and people recognized certain things in me, and then took that in. So for me, it was just a joy of you know, of half the community being called Aunt Sue and Mom.
Family.
Yeah, and
whether
and warm,
blood relation or not.
whether not, and people having nicknames, Ginger Girl and Blue Eye, and so people's lives mattered on many different levels. And then I began to do research, you know, and kind of find out that there was a very strong historical link to the culture there in terms of language, in terms of the nickname and traditions, all those kind of things. And it really revolutionized me. So you know, it's something I feel I pay homage to in every opportunity I get in my work. Half of my work is based on drawing from the richness of, especially the oral culture.
Yes. Do you get that back from people when they've read your poetry, they've seen your play, or they've seen your paintings? Well, do people say yes?
Do they appreciate it?
Yeah.
They say, "What the hell you doing talking about me on the TV, Dave?" Oh, they certainly appreciate it in painting, you know, when I make them beautiful. And I think because people have not, the Prestons, for a very long time in the history, was tagged with a whole lot of negative images. So when you actually start talking about, the assumption is that you're always going to be talking about something negative. So I use a lot of the old verbal style. So I think initially a lot of people thought, well, is he now another person making fun? Some people, you know, some people got it right away, you know, that I was appreciating language. So I got mixed, and then some people just don't like the fact that you're not from there and actually articulating. But my love is such that, you know, I'm going to do what my heart calls me to do. And that is the source of my strength, you know, especially the one family, the Fraser family. So, you know, and it totally enriched my work. So I continue to articulate through the voice of North Preston.
Yes.
And also to see the world using the base of that oral culture in terms of opening up not just plays or poems about that community, but also the rest of the world. I mean, it's influenced my whole art form.
Yes. Could you read a poem for us, please?
All right.
This is a recent poem?
Well, I can do some, since we're talking about up home, I could
poem
do,
is North Preston.
I could do, yeah, I could do some, a few up home ones. And these are what I call more verbally based poems in terms of deriving straight from the oral culture.
Yes.
When he was young, he had God, he had religion. He played the guitar, and his music was the soul's hum when he was young. He had a bright future and kindness in his eyes, and he had the prettiest girl in Preston, and filled our talk with his surprise. When he was young, when he was young, now he's a bum.
A bit of borrowing from voices of like someone else that you've heard telling a story that was either that or close to that.
Right.
And you
just picking up little fragments. I'll read one more. Let's see. Sayings. Whoever said that all you got to do is be black and die must have been a rich brother, because that sure is a goddamn lie. Whoever said that all black people is ugly must have never laid eyes on Maybelline Downey. And whoever said that all black people is poor and oppressed must have never been to a wedding in Preston, because I sure am impressed. Yeah. So it's just
another voice, completely different person.
Yeah, and just allowing the community's richness to be the subject, you know.
Can you introduce us to another?
Sure. Let me see. All right, suddenly mama stopped cooking. Suddenly mama stopped cooking. Blueberry pies, lemon cake, pineapple chicken. Put on a fancy dress and started doing the shake. Papa complains about this new freedom in his woman. What? Rose thinks that she young, he complains. But mama ain't shook, and Aunt Joan put it best. He took Rose's first 50 years, now Rose is taking the rest.
When you were young, were you encouraged to pursue creative things?
Hell no.
No, there were no role models in front of you.
Dad, it was the straight up lawyer thing. You be, in my family, you'll be a lawyer, a doctor, or you don't breathe. And that was it, you know, you just a straight, you know, you had to fulfill. And being an immigrant family is even worse, because their need to, you know, to fill up the space with degrees and brag to friends back home and all that, you know. So
no respectability for writers, for poets, for playwrights.
Oh, it was pretty awesome. my family life was not a very good life. My father was a failed lawyer, and I was supposed to, because I was supposedly brilliant in school, was supposed to fulfill that dream. I found out quite early in the game that my mind was just drifting into all kinds of different worlds. You know, I'd be writing poetry while I'm doing my exams, doodling all over my books and stuff. And I didn't have any encouragement. I didn't know how. I didn't know anything about the landscape of actually a career. All I knew, there was this insistent need, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote thousands and thousands of pages. And then finally, you know, you kind of just collapsed, you know. The pressure of trying to be divided, you know, and it took me about 4 years to kind of figure out what it was.
So not very good at taking other people's advice necessarily, or following the path.
Well,
that
it's
someone was
just
trying to
that
set you down.
I grew up in a way that I didn't know what advice was. You know, I didn't, you know, if my childhood was so limited, being an immigrant son, not knowing people, not being connected to culturally to Nova Scotia. So it was only my parents in terms of directing me up until college. So I didn't really know how. I didn't, you know, I probably would have taken advice if I had more people in my landscape, but it was very narrow.
Yes.
I said, until I got to the Prestons, I didn't have that many people in my world. You know, in my school world, I was, you know, strictly an academic, into the student council, all those kind of things. So you know, but even that turmoil allowed me to, you know, to sink deeper into my own truth. So it wasn't all negative, but it was a very difficult journey.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah.
We're going to take a very short break and be back with David Woods right after this. welcome back to Off the Page. My guest today is David Woods. Now, David, you brought along some paintings today.
Right.
This is a whole other side we haven't even touched upon yet, the poet, the
Plus
playwright.
my other stuff, too. Don't mean to brag.
Uh-oh, what other stuff now?
My storytelling, my tap dancing.
Oh, yeah?
Only joking, man.
Okay, we'll save that. We'll get that on the second show.
Right.
In your first book of poetry, Native Song, there were some paintings that were included, and they're very eloquent, beautiful paintings coming from the community again, is what I see there.
Definitely.
Tell me about the three paintings that you brought in today.
Yeah, I brought in two of mine and one of a friend of mine. So the first one's called Aunt Evie.
Is this the big one?
The big one.
Okay.
The one that I needed a truck to get here.
Yes.
Aunt Evie is, again, coming out of the Preston area. I recently curated the first exhibition of artists from the Preston area in a show called Home. And both as a curator and a participating artist. So this was my contribution to that particular exhibition called Home. And Aunt Evie, which is an older woman, and through her eyes I tried to represent the traditions, the hopes, the aspirations of a community kind of embodied in her face and her life, which I hope is revealed on the canvas.
Yeah.
The second piece I bought is called Seaview, and it's a tribute to Africville. It's done in I guess a more folk style, you know, influenced by Romeo Bearden, American folk artist.
Africville is the black community in Halifax that
on the
ceased to exist.
Yeah, in 1969 it was, well, beginning in the 60s was bulldozed by the city of Halifax. One of the most horrendous things that have ever happened to the black community here, and the repercussions which run really deep, you know. So I write a lot about Africville. I also contributed, this particular painting was also on contributed to the CD Africville Suite by Joe Seeley, which won the Juno for Best Contemporary Jazz, which I also contributed writings to. So this painting represents a lot of what I've been doing in the last 10 years. Also, Preston and Africville have been a focus for a lot of my work.
I'm under the impression you don't just stand and do a painting, that paintings evolve over a
they
long
evolve.
period of time for you.
You know, if I were to say if I was called to anything, it's painting, because I had no precedent. There was no training. There was no, there was no before and after script. I wanted to paint. I painted, and it was only later people said, "Oh, you paint well."
You figured it
I
out,
had no consciousness of the reasons or anything. It was just the need to visualize certain things that I was feeling. So I guess you call that a gift.
So you live with it. It's there. You, you part of it.
If you ever came to my apartment, you would know. They're everywhere.
Living with it.
Yeah.
In various
there's
stages
less and
of
less
completion.
space for me and my guests. You know, people walk out. I can't be in here, Dave. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, I live with them, and they function. Not just in terms of just their own form, but they feed the whole consciousness, because I'm a very free-form, I guess, existentialist kind of approach in terms of how I live and how I create. Yes. So all the things just mesh and feed each other. So they're like all my little children, and they kind of, you know, and then, you know, I look at something, it forces out a poem, it forces out a play, it forces out, but they all contribute to
everything
each other.
Relates with each other. Tell me about the third painting you brought.
Yeah, the third painting is called Down the Road, and it was done by a young artist called Justin Augustine, a recent graduate of NASCAD, and he's been in the last two shows that I've curated, In This Place and Home. And I think he's a really important up-and-coming young African-Canadian artist, and I took him, he's originally from Toronto, and his parents from the Caribbean, and he didn't know much about the local landscape. So I drove him around to, you know, all the different communities, and this was his first interpretation of the local scene. And I think it was quite, you know, important to me, because it was a section of North Preston that I spent a lot of time in.
Good. I'm glad you brought those paintings. And before our time is out, too, I want to talk about your new project that you've embarked upon here. It's something where you're giving back to the community at the same time you're taking something from the community. You're traveling and talking. Who are you talking to?
Right. Sacred Missions. I'm going, it's the end of when there was all this talk of the end of the millennium. As a writer, it's always occurred to me that every time I tried to enter a certain era, a certain time period, I never could find authentic voices. There's very few writings on the black community previous to the 60s, and a lot of it was under the the guise of certain things. So there was be religious that just talked about the church. Growing up here and understanding all the different dimensions that people exist in, I wanted to actually make a statement of the African Canadian community at the end of the century. So the book is called Sacred Missions. I go to 40 black communities in Nova Scotia, which some people still find amazing, you know, but it is true, you know, part of our invisibility is that people still don't recognize just the fact that we're here. And I spend a week in each community and I talk to people, absorb stories, and then it spits out in whatever forms it does, and then I create a book out of it.
So you're getting some really good stories.
Oh
from
yeah,
people,
yeah. I mean,
older people mostly.
Everybody, anything that's interesting, because to some extent I plan certain people because of their significance and their contributions. In other contexts, I'd be sitting at the local bar, the Tim Hortons, and somebody be up on the stage doing the karaoke, and there's an interesting story attached to her. So it's really, I didn't impose any, you know, script on that. I allowed it, you know, all the things that affected me to come in.
Get yourself to the right place at the right time, and the story will happen.
Yeah, and then at the end of it, you know, when I'm finished, because I'm still on that, around October, I'm going to spend 3 to 4 months just regurgitating the material in a much more structured, disciplined way. So, you know, it's really surprised me because it has already kind of spoken through me just being on the road in different forms, you know, some paintings that have kind of spit out of me surprisingly, some spoken word pieces, some short stories, you know, that suddenly crystallized. So it's been really an enriching experience, and it's going to be exhausting, but I think you know, it's probably going to be the thing that will define my work on the larger Canadian landscape.
Sounds like a good project.
Yeah.
We're going to take a short break and be back with David Woods right after this. We're here on Off the Page. My guest today has been David Woods. We're right down to the end of the show, and I'm dying to hear one more poem. And shuffling through his papers at this very moment, folks, because he's trying to find one that fits, and I think he has it.
Right. I'm a very long-winded guy, but I'll see if this fits the time period. Variation on the theme of flying. And if not in this place, then where will the black notes lift out of my beaten body and find voice in the refusing air? And if not in these feet, then in whose feet will the journey be made through the roughness and a new route to freedom be found again? And if not in this mouth, then in whose mouth will my history be rescued from oblivion and its story be told with beauty once again? I offer these dark hands to lift up what you seek to deny. I offer this soiled history to set a new stage. I offer this wounded dream to feed the mind's hunger. Go forth, make life glorious. I'll stop there because it's probably too long for the sequence.
David Woods, thanks very much for coming and sharing that. This is probably from a new book project.
That's right.
Title for that book project?
Notes from Birmingham Street.
Thanks for coming on the show. And thanks for watching Off the Page. I'll see you again next time.